A boarding pass trembled in Marcus Coleman's hand. Row 2, Seat B, First Class. The words felt foreign, impossible, like they belonged to someone else's life. He stood at gate B14 in Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, watching other passengers file onto Flight 447, and wondered if this was real or some cruel dream his exhausted mind had conjured. Behind him, an elderly white man smiled gently and nodded. Walt Cunningham had pressed this ticket into Marcus's calloused hands 30 minutes ago after overhearing a desperate phone call. "A man going home to his dying mother deserves dignity," Walt had said quietly. "Take my seat." Marcus had tried to refuse, tried to explain he couldn't accept such generosity, but Walt had insisted with the kind of firm kindness that left no room for argument. Now Marcus stepped onto the jetway, his father's worn leather satchel heavy on his shoulder, and walked toward a seat he'd never thought he'd occupy, carrying hope that he'd reach Mobile in time to hold his mother's hand one last time. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus James Coleman stood at the threshold of the jetway, his weathered Carhartt jacket hanging loose on his lean frame. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd learned early that the world didn't owe him anything. But that didn't mean he'd accept less than what was rightfully his. His hands, calloused from years of working wood, gripped the boarding pass like it was made of glass. Row 2, Seat B, First Class. The words still felt foreign on his tongue. He'd been born in Mobile, Alabama, in a shotgun house where summer heat pressed through the walls like a living thing and winter cold found every crack. His mother, Dorothy Mae Coleman, had raised him and his 2 sisters alone, working night shifts, cleaning offices downtown while other families slept. Marcus never knew his father, except through stories and a single photograph. James Coleman Sr. had died in the jungles of Vietnam in 1970, 7 months before Marcus drew his first breath. All Marcus had of him was an old leather satchel with his father's initials stamped into the worn hide, and his mother's quiet assurance that he had his daddy's hands. Those hands had learned to build at 12 years old, standing beside his grandfather in a dusty workshop that smelled of sawdust and motor oil. By 16, Marcus could read wood grain like other boys read comic books. By 20, he was crafting custom furniture that made wealthy clients forget to ask about his age or his address. He'd never married, never had children. Every dollar he earned beyond basic survival went to one purpose: taking care of the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. 6 months ago, the doctors had spoken words that turned his world to ash. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, inoperable, weeks, maybe months. Marcus had worked 3 jobs simultaneously, slept 4 hours a night, built cabinets and tables and chairs until his hands bled, all trying to buy time that money couldn't purchase. 2 weeks ago, he'd moved his mother into St. Mary's Hospice, a small facility with kind nurses and a smell of antiseptic that couldn't quite mask the scent of approaching death. Yesterday, the call had come while he was in Seattle, finishing an emergency commission. The nurse's voice had been gentle but firm. If he wanted to see his mother alive, he needed to come now. Marcus had rushed to the airport, his heart a drum against his ribs, and stood at the gate with his economy ticket clutched in his fist, calculating whether he'd make it in time. That's when the old white man had approached him, Walt Cunningham, though Marcus didn't know his name yet, had simply listened to Marcus's desperate phone call to the hospice, watched him promise his mother he was coming, and then quietly pressed his first-class boarding pass into Marcus's hands. The gesture had been so unexpected, so purely kind, that Marcus had nearly wept right there in the terminal. Now he walked down the aisle of Flight 447, counting rows, his father's satchel heavy on his shoulder, carrying everything he owned that mattered. The cabin smelled of leather and expensive coffee, a world Marcus had only glimpsed through magazines in waiting rooms. Soft overhead lights cast everything in a warm glow that felt almost unreal. The seats were wider than his couch at home, upholstered in material that whispered wealth with every touch. He counted the rows carefully, moving past businessmen already settled with laptops open and women in tailored suits studying their phones with the practiced indifference of frequent travelers. Row 2 appeared on his left. Seat B, the window seat, exactly as printed on his boarding pass. But someone was already sitting there, a woman, perhaps in her early 50s, sat with a laptop balanced on the tray table, phone pressed between her shoulder and ear. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features. She wore a gray Armani suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month, and her manicured nails clicked against the keyboard with mechanical precision. She didn't look up as he stopped beside the row. Marcus cleared his throat softly. The woman's fingers continued their dance across the keys. "Excuse me, ma'am." His voice came out quieter than he intended. The voice of a boy who'd learned early not to take up too much space in the world. "I think you might be in my seat." The woman made a small sound, something between acknowledgement and dismissal, but her eyes remained fixed on her screen. Her lips moved silently, counting something, calculating. Marcus waited, his father's satchel growing heavier on his shoulder. 30 seconds passed. The flight attendant was helping someone store luggage several rows back. Other passengers squeezed past him in the aisle, shooting him curious glances. "Ma'am?" He tried again, louder this time. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is seat 2B. That's my seat." The woman finally glanced up, and Marcus saw her eyes make a quick journey from his face down to his worn jacket, his faded jeans, his work boots that he'd cleaned but couldn't quite make look new. Something flickered across her expression, too fast to name, before her gaze returned to her screen. "I don't think so," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being right. "I specifically requested this seat. Check your ticket again." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the boarding pass, holding it where she could see. "It says right here, ma'am, row 2, seat B, C." He pointed to the printed letters, his calloused finger leaving a slight smudge on the paper. She barely glanced at it. "There's obviously been a computer error. I fly every week. The system knows my preferences. You must have been assigned incorrectly." She returned her attention to the laptop as if the matter was settled. "But ma'am," Marcus's voice carried a note of desperation now, thinking of the hours ticking away, of his mother's labored breathing on the phone that morning. "A gentleman at the gate. He gave me his ticket. He said—" Then that gentleman made a mistake. The woman cut him off without looking up. First class isn't just about buying a ticket. It's about consistency, regular passengers, people who understand the protocols. The words hit Marcus like a physical thing. He understood what she meant without her having to say it plainly. He'd heard variations of this message his entire life, delivered in 1,000 subtle ways. You don't belong here. This isn't for people like you. I understand protocols, ma'am, he said, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. I just need to get home. My mother, she's... We all have somewhere important to be, the woman interrupted again. That's why systems exist. Please speak with the flight attendant. Marcus stood frozen in the aisle, a war raging inside him. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Baby, you hold your head high. You got every right to walk through any door. But another voice, older and more insistent, whispered the lessons learned from a lifetime of small rejections. Don't make a scene. They'll believe her over you. They always do. Behind him, he heard someone else entering first class. The footsteps stopped, and Marcus felt eyes on his back. He clutched his boarding pass tighter, the paper crinkling in his grip, and thought of his mother lying in a hospice bed 3 states away, asking for him, waiting for him. Every minute he stood here arguing was a minute stolen from whatever time they had left. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably another update from the nurse. His stomach twisted with dread and urgency in equal measure. The voice that spoke up came from behind Marcus, steady and warm, like honey poured over gravel. Excuse me, dear. I couldn't help but overhear. The young man has his boarding pass right there. Perhaps you could check yours. Marcus turned to see a black woman, perhaps in her late 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a navy cardigan over a floral dress, and her eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from witnessing too much of life's unfairness and choosing kindness anyway. She stood in the aisle with her carry-on, waiting patiently, but her gaze was fixed on the woman in Marcus's seat with an expression that brooked no nonsense. The blonde woman looked up, irritation flashing across her features. I know where my seat is. I've sat here dozens of times. But not today, honey, the older woman said, her voice gentle but immovable as stone. Today it belongs to him. A businessman in seat 1A lowered his newspaper, glancing between them. A young couple in row 4 stopped their whispered conversation, craning their necks to see what was happening. Marcus felt the weight of attention settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. The flight attendant appeared, a tall woman with auburn hair pulled into a professional bun, her smile practiced but genuine. Her name tag read, Jennifer. Is everything all right here? Yes, the blonde woman said quickly. There's just been a seating mix-up. This young man seems to think he has 2B. But clearly there's been an error in the system. I always sit in this seat. Jennifer's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass? Please. The woman's hand went to her chest, fingers splaying across the expensive fabric of her suit jacket. Marcus noticed her breathing had changed, becoming shallow and rapid. Her other hand gripped the edge of her laptop so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I don't need to show you my boarding pass, she said, her voice rising slightly. I'm Catherine Preston. I fly this route every single week. Call your supervisor, call the gate agent. They'll confirm my seat assignment. The older woman in the cardigan shifted her carry-on to her other hand. Ma'am, the flight attendant is just trying to do her job. We all want to get going. Just show her your ticket so we can sort this out. Jennifer maintained her professional composure, though Marcus saw a flicker of something in her eyes, frustration or perhaps sympathy. He couldn't tell which. "Ma'am, I understand you're a frequent flyer, and we appreciate your loyalty, but we need to verify seat assignments before departure. It's FAA regulation." The word regulation seemed to trigger something in the woman. Catherine. Her breathing quickened further, and a thin sheen of perspiration appeared on her upper lip. Her hand trembled as she reached into her designer handbag, pulling out a boarding pass and thrusting it toward Jennifer with more force than necessary. Jennifer took it, studied it for a long moment, and Marcus watched her expression shift from professional courtesy to careful neutrality. She looked up at Catherine, then at Marcus, then back at the boarding pass in her hand. "Ma'am," Jennifer said slowly, her voice softer now, "your seat is 8A. That's in the economy plus cabin, about 6 rows back." The silence that followed felt like the moment before thunder, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. Marcus heard someone several rows back whisper to their companion. The businessman in 1A made no pretense of reading his newspaper anymore. Everyone was watching now. Catherine's face flushed crimson, but instead of moving, she seemed to dig in deeper, her body rigid in the seat. "That can't be right. I always sit in row 2. I need to sit in row 2. Her voice had taken on a desperate edge. "I have to be able to see the cockpit door. I have to know what's happening. I need this seat." Marcus saw it then, the way her eyes darted to the closed cockpit door and back, the way her chest rose and fell too quickly, the way her fingers tapped against her leg in a rhythm that seemed involuntary. This wasn't just entitlement. This was fear. The older woman in the cardigan saw it too. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something maternal and concerned. "Honey, are you all right? You look pale. Maybe you should take a moment, get some water." But Catherine wasn't listening. She turned to Marcus, and in her eyes, he saw something wild and cornered. "How did you get this seat? How does someone like you afford first class?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus heard the sharp intake of breath from multiple passengers. The young couple in row 4 exchanged wide-eyed glances. The businessman muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. Marcus felt the familiar heat of shame and anger mixing in his chest, a cocktail he'd been served too many times in his 32 years. "Someone like you." The words were carefully chosen, plausibly deniable, but their meaning was crystal clear to everyone in the cabin. His hands tightened on the boarding pass, crinkling the paper. "Someone like me," he repeated quietly. Catherine seemed to realize what she'd said, her eyes widening slightly. "I didn't mean it that way. I just meant you're young, and your clothes. I didn't mean to imply anything about you personally. I just meant that the system must have made an error because this seat requires certain protocols and—" She was babbling now, digging herself deeper with every word, and Marcus could see she knew it. Her carefully constructed facade was cracking, revealing something raw and wounded underneath. The older woman in the cardigan stepped forward, placing herself slightly between Marcus and Catherine, a human buffer against the tension crackling in the air. "Ma'am, I'm going to stop you right there before you say something you'll regret even more." Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating difficult conversations in difficult circumstances. This young man doesn't owe you an explanation for why he's in this seat. But since you asked, and since everyone's listening now anyway, maybe it's time we all heard the truth." She turned to Marcus, her eyes soft with understanding. "Son, if you want to tell them, tell them. If you don't, you don't have to. This is your seat, and that's all that matters. But sometimes—" She glanced back at Catherine, then at the other passengers watching with varying degrees of discomfort and curiosity. "Sometimes people need to understand what their words cost." Marcus looked at the woman, this stranger who'd stepped in to defend him when she could have easily kept walking to her own seat and minded her own business. He saw something in her face that reminded him of his mother, that same steel wrapped in softness, that refusal to let injustice pass unchallenged even when challenging it would be easier. He thought of his mother lying in that hospice bed, how she'd raised him to never make himself small for anyone's comfort, how she'd told him 1,000 times that his existence was not an apology he needed to make. He thought of his father, a man he'd never met, who'd carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire because that's what decent people do. Marcus took a breath and looked not at Catherine, but at his own hands. Those carpenter's hands that had built so much beauty from raw wood. "My name is Marcus James Coleman," he began, his voice low but steady. "I'm a carpenter. I build furniture, cabinets, tables, chairs. Been doing it since I was 16 years old, learning from my grandfather in a workshop that was hotter than hell in summer and colder than a meat locker in winter." He paused, gathering the words like nails in his palm. "I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, in a shotgun house where we shared one bathroom between 5 people, and the air conditioning was a box fan in the window. My mama, Dorothy Coleman, she raised me and my 2 sisters by herself. My daddy died in Vietnam 7 months before I was born." Someone in the back of the cabin shifted, and Marcus heard the rustle of fabric as people turned to listen more closely. The businessman in 1A had set his newspaper down completely. Mama worked as a domestic worker. That's a fancy way of saying she cleaned other people's houses. She'd scrub toilets and mop floors and dust furniture in homes bigger than our whole neighborhood. Then at night, when those families were sleeping in their clean houses, she'd go clean offices downtown. She'd come home at 2 in the morning with her hands raw and her back aching. But she never missed making us breakfast before school, never missed a parent-teacher conference, never missed a Christmas, even if Christmas was just socks and oranges because that's all she could afford. Marcus's voice thickened, but he pushed through. 6 months ago, the doctors told us she had cancer, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. They said there wasn't much they could do, that it had spread too far. They gave her months, maybe weeks. He heard a soft sound from somewhere behind him, someone trying to muffle a sob. The young couple in row 4 were holding hands now, the woman's eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've been working 3 jobs trying to pay for her care, building custom cabinets during the day, doing repairs in the evenings, taking emergency jobs on weekends. I've slept maybe 4 hours a night for half a year. 2 weeks ago, when she got too sick to stay at home, I had to move her into hospice care, St. Mary's, in Mobile. It's a small place, nothing fancy. But the nurses are kind and they don't rush you when you're saying what might be your last goodbyes." Marcus finally looked up, meeting the eyes of the passengers watching him. I've been in Seattle finishing a job. Emergency work. Kitchen cabinets for a restaurant that needed them done fast. They paid double because they were desperate. I needed that money for Mama's hospice bills." His voice cracked slightly. "Yesterday, the nurse called me. She said Mama was declining. She said if I wanted to see her, if I wanted to hold her hand one more time and tell her I love her, I needed to come now. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now." The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the plane seemed to have dimmed. "This morning, I was at the gate, and I was on the phone with the hospice, and I was promising Mama that I was coming, that I'd be there soon, that she just needed to hold on a little longer." Marcus's eyes found Catherine's, holding her gaze. And this elderly gentleman, white man probably in his 70s, he walked up to me after I hung up. He heard me talking to my Mama. He didn't know me from Adam, but he looked at me and he said, "Son, a man going home to his dying mother deserves to travel with dignity. Take my first-class seat." Marcus held up the boarding pass, its edges now wrinkled from his grip. I told him no. I said I couldn't take it, that it was too much, that I'd be fine in economy. But he insisted. He said someone had done him a kindness once, a long time ago, and he was just passing it on. He said that's what decent people do. He let the words settle for a moment before continuing. "So no, ma'am. I didn't buy this ticket myself. I don't have that kind of money. I've never had that kind of money. I've been on a plane exactly twice in my entire life, and both times were in the last year. Flying to see Mama when she got too sick to talk on the phone." His voice grew firmer, stronger. "I don't know all the protocols. I don't know the rules about who sits where or what kind of person deserves first class. I just know that my Mama is dying 3 states away, and she's asking for me. And this seat, this one seat on this one flight, is the only thing standing between me and the last chance I'll ever have to hold her hand and tell her thank you for every sacrifice she ever made for me." Marcus's eyes swept across the cabin, taking in all the faces watching him. "So if that doesn't make me deserve to sit here, if my Mama's love and sacrifice and a stranger's kindness aren't enough to earn me this seat, then I don't know what would be. But I'm tired of apologizing for existing in spaces that make other people uncomfortable. I'm tired of making myself small so other folks can feel big." He looked directly at Catherine again. "And I'm sorry if my being here scares you or confuses you or disrupts your routine. But my Mama is dying, and I'm going home to her. And nothing, not your comfort, not your protocols, not your fear, is going to stop me from being there when she needs me." The cabin erupted. Someone started clapping, slowly at first. Then others joined in. The older woman in the cardigan nodded approvingly, her eyes wet with tears. The businessman in 1A said loudly, "That's right, son. You sit wherever the hell you want." But Marcus noticed Catherine hadn't moved. She sat frozen in the seat, her face pale, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her hands trembled violently now, and she was staring at the cockpit door with an expression of pure terror. The older woman in the cardigan immediately recognized what was happening. She moved swiftly to Catherine's side, her voice dropping to a gentle murmur that only those nearby could hear. "Honey, you're having a panic attack. I need you to look at me. Can you look at me?" Catherine's eyes remained fixed on the cockpit door, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Her perfectly manicured hands clutched at the armrests like they were the only things keeping her tethered to earth. "Ma'am," the flight attendant Jennifer said, concern replacing her professional detachment. "Do you need medical attention? Should I call for a doctor?" The older woman shook her head slightly. "Give me a moment with her." She knelt in the aisle beside Catherine's seat, placing a gentle hand on the woman's arm. "My name is Ruby Mae Thornton. I was a hospice nurse for 42 years. I've seen panic attacks before. Honey, you're safe. The plane isn't even moving yet. You're safe." Catherine's breathing didn't slow, but her eyes finally moved from the cockpit door to Ruby's face. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't breathe. I need this seat. I have to see the door. I have to know if something goes wrong. I have to be able to see." "Why do you need to see the door, sweetheart?" Ruby's voice was soft, coaxing, the voice of someone who'd spent decades helping people through their worst moments. Catherine's facade cracked completely. Tears spilled down her carefully made-up face, cutting tracks through her foundation. "My husband," she choked out. "Thomas, he was a pilot. He was a good pilot. The best." The cabin had gone quiet again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. People weren't watching with judgment anymore. They were listening with the uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something private, something painful. 8 years ago," Catherine continued, her words tumbling out between gasping breaths, "there was an incident on one of his flights. A mechanical failure. He managed to land the plane safely. Every single passenger walked away without a scratch. But the airline, they needed someone to blame. They said he violated protocol. They said he made errors in judgment." Ruby kept her hand on Catherine's arm, steady and warm. "But he didn't. He didn't." Catherine's voice broke on the words. "The investigation eventually cleared him, but it took months. By then, his reputation was destroyed. The airline fired him. Other airlines wouldn't hire him. Flying was everything to him. It was who he was." She wiped at her face with shaking hands. "He felt like he'd failed everyone, failed the passengers, failed the profession, failed me, failed our daughter." Marcus stood frozen in the aisle, his anger from moments before transforming into something more complicated. He saw his own pain reflected in this woman's eyes, the same desperate grief he'd been carrying for 6 months. 6 months after he was fired, Catherine whispered. He took a bottle of pills, left a note saying he was sorry, that he couldn't live with the shame of what they'd accused him of, even though he'd been cleared. He said the world would be better without a pilot who'd lost everyone's trust. Someone in the back of the cabin made a small, pained sound. The young woman in row 4 pressed her hand to her mouth. "After that," Catherine continued, her voice hollow now, "I couldn't get on a plane without feeling like I was going to die. Every single flight. I have to sit where I can see the cockpit door. I have to watch who goes in and out. I have to feel like if something goes wrong, I'll know. I'll see it coming." She looked up at Marcus for the first time with clear eyes. "I saw you standing there, in this seat, and I panicked. I thought if things weren't in their proper order, if the wrong person was in the wrong place, something terrible would happen. It's not rational. I know it's not rational, but I can't stop it." Ruby squeezed Catherine's arm gently. "Honey, that's called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. What you're describing, this need for control, this fear, It's your brain trying to protect you from more trauma, but it's making you hurt other people who don't deserve it. Catherine turned to Marcus, fresh tears streaming. I'm so sorry. What I said, how I looked at you. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I wasn't thinking about you as a person. I was just seeing someone in my seat, disrupting my routine, threatening my fragile sense of control. But that's no excuse. There's no excuse for what I said. Marcus stood there, his father's satchel still heavy on his shoulder, torn between his own hurt and this unexpected glimpse into another person's suffering. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Baby, hurt people, but healed people heal people. Ma'am, he said quietly, I'm sorry about your husband. I truly am. The simple kindness in his words seemed to break something in Catherine. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, not the quiet tears of before, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Ruby looked up at Marcus with something like wonder in her eyes. Son, you just heard this woman try to take your seat and insult you in the same breath, and your first response is compassion. Marcus shrugged uncomfortably. My mama always said we're all carrying something heavy. Just because you can't see someone's load doesn't mean it isn't there. Your mama? Ruby said, shaking her head with a sad smile. Sounds like she was one hell of a woman. She is, Marcus corrected gently, then caught himself. She is. She's still here. For now. From the back of the first-class cabin, an elderly white man stood up. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with military bearing despite his age. His face was weathered but kind, and his eyes were fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. The man walked slowly up the aisle, and as he drew closer, Marcus could see he was crying. Excuse me, the man said, his voice rough with emotion. I need to say something. I need to tell you all something. Jennifer, the flight attendant, stepped forward. Sir, we really need to get everyone seated so we can... This will just take a moment, the man said, not unkindly. But it's important. It's been waiting 53 years to be said. He stopped in front of Marcus, and Marcus noticed the man's hands were trembling. My name is Walter Cunningham. Walt. I'm the man who gave this young man my first-class seat this morning. A murmur went through the cabin. People shifted to get a better look. I did it, Walt continued, his voice shaking. Because 53 years ago, in 1970, I was 19 years old, and I was dying in a jungle in Vietnam. I'd been shot, shrapnel in my leg and chest, bleeding out in the mud while my unit fell back under heavy fire. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew where this was going before Walt said another word. My lieutenant looked at me, and I saw it in his eyes. We have to leave you. There was no choice. They couldn't carry me and fight at the same time. Walt's voice broke. But then a medic, a man who'd only been with our unit for 2 weeks. He ran back through the gunfire. He picked me up, threw me over his shoulder even though I probably weighed 200 pounds back then, and he ran. Walt was crying openly now, making no attempt to hide it. He carried me 3 miles through enemy territory, got shot at the whole way. When we finally made it to the evacuation point, I asked him why. Why would you risk your life for me? We barely knew each other. Walt paused, His eyes locked on Marcus. "You know what he said?" he said. "Because that's what decent people do, kid. We don't leave each other behind." Marcus's legs felt suddenly weak. Ruby reached out to steady him, sensing what was coming. "His name," Walt said, his voice barely above a whisper now, "was James Coleman, Staff Sergeant James Coleman, from Mobile, Alabama." The cabin seemed to tilt. Marcus heard his own breathing, loud in his ears, felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "He died 2 months later," Walt continued. "Saving another soldier. Another kid who would have died if James hadn't run back into the fire." Marcus couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The satchel slipped from his shoulder and would have hit the floor if Ruby hadn't caught it. Walt stepped closer, and Marcus saw his father's face in the old man's eyes, reflected in tears and memory. "This morning at the gate," Walt said, his voice trembling, "I heard you on the phone. I heard you say your name. Marcus Coleman, from Mobile. And I saw that bag you're carrying, that old leather satchel with the initials JC stamped into it." He gestured to the bag now in Ruby's hands. "I looked you up while I was waiting to board, found an article about a local carpenter in Mobile. It mentioned your father, James Coleman Sr., killed in action, Vietnam, 1970. Walt reached out with shaking hands and gripped Marcus's shoulders. "Son, your father saved my life. Because of him, I got to come home. I got to meet my wife, Mary. I got to raise 3 children. I got to hold my grandchildren and teach them to fish and tell them stories." His voice cracked completely. "I got to live. I got 53 years of life because your daddy ran back into hell to carry me out." Marcus felt his knees buckle. Ruby was there instantly, supporting him, guiding him to sit on the armrest of seat 1A. The businessman who'd been sitting there had moved to give them space, standing in the aisle with tears streaming down his own face. "I never knew him," Marcus whispered. "I never got to meet my daddy." Walt knelt in front of him, this 72-year-old veteran getting down on arthritic knees in the airplane aisle. "Then let me tell you about him. Let me tell you about the bravest man I ever met." The entire cabin was silent now, passengers craning to listen, flight attendants frozen in place. Even the captain had emerged from the cockpit to stand in the doorway. "Your father," Walt began, wiping his eyes. "He had these big carpenter's hands, just like yours. I remember because when he picked me up, those hands were so steady, even with bullets flying past us. He talked the whole time he was carrying me. You know, kept saying, 'Stay with me, kid. You're going home. I'm getting you home.' I was fading in and out, losing blood, and his voice was the only thing keeping me conscious." Marcus's tears fell freely now, splashing onto his work-worn jeans. "When we got to the evac point and they were loading me onto the helicopter, I grabbed his arm. I said, 'Why? Why did you come back for me? I never even thanked you for anything. I never treated you like you mattered.' You know what he said?" Walt's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said, "Because that's what decent people do. We don't leave each other behind. Doesn't matter what color you are or where you're from. We're all in this together." Walt pulled a worn photograph from his wallet, handled so many times the edges were soft. It showed a young black man in uniform, smiling at the camera with confident, kind eyes. "I've carried this for 53 years. Your father, probably around 20 years old when this was taken." Marcus took the photo with trembling hands and saw his own face looking back at him across the decades. The same broad nose, the same strong jaw, the same eyes that his mother always said carried both sadness and hope in equal measure. "You look just like him," Walt said. "God Almighty, you look exactly like him." Ruby knelt beside Walt, her hand on Marcus's knee. "Do you know what this means?" "Son, your father's kindness didn't die with him. It's been living in this man for 53 years. And this morning, it came full circle. It came back to you when you needed it most." Catherine had risen from seat 2B, standing in the aisle with mascara streaking her face. "I'm so sorry," she said to Marcus. "I'm so sorry for every word I said. Your father was a hero. You're the son of a hero. And I tried to take from you the one thing a stranger gave you in honor of your father's sacrifice." Marcus looked at her, then at Walt, then at Ruby, then at all the faces watching him with expressions ranging from awe to sorrow to something like reverence. He thought about his mother lying in a hospice bed, about how she'd kept his father's memory alive through stories and love, about how she'd raised him to be kind even when the world was cruel. "My mama," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "She told me stories about my daddy every night before bed. She said he was good and brave and that he believed people were better than the worst things the world made them do. She said he died trying to make the world safer for me, for a son he'd never met." Marcus looked at Walt. "But I never really knew him. I never got to hear his voice or feel him hug me or ask him how to be a man." Walt stood slowly, his knees popping, and pulled Marcus to his feet. Then he wrapped his arms around him, and Marcus collapsed into the embrace, sobbing into the stranger's shoulder, mourning the father he'd never known and the mother he was losing. The two men stood there, locked in an embrace that bridged 53 years of separation, grief, and unspoken gratitude. Around them, the cabin had dissolved into tears. The young couple in row 4 held each other. The businessman who'd given up his seat wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Even the captain, a dignified black man in his 60s, stood in the cockpit doorway with his hand pressed over his heart. When they finally separated, Walt kept his hands on Marcus's shoulders, looking at him with an expression of wonder mixed with sorrow. "I've spent 53 years trying to figure out how to repay what your father gave me. How do you repay someone who gave you your entire life? Every birthday I've celebrated, every Christmas with my grandchildren, every sunset I've watched, I've thought about James Coleman and wondered how I could possibly honor what he did." Marcus pulled his father's satchel from Ruby's hands, opened it with trembling fingers, and withdrew a small wooden box. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wood polished to a soft glow, with a tiny hummingbird carved into the lid. "This was supposed to be for my mama. I made it for her. It was going to be my gift. Something to hold her favorite things." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, was a folded letter in his own handwriting and a single photograph of Dorothy Coleman as a young woman, holding a baby Marcus, her face radiant with love and exhaustion. "I was going to give this to her today," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I was going to watch her face light up and hear her say it was beautiful. That's all I wanted. Just one more time to make my mama smile." His phone buzzed in his pocket. The sound cut through the moment like a knife. Marcus pulled it out with shaking hands, saw the screen, and his face went white. "It's the hospice." The cabin fell silent again. But this time the silence was suffocating, terrible. Everyone knew what a call from the hospice meant. Marcus stared at the phone, unable to make himself answer it. Ruby gently took the phone from his hand. "Let me, baby, let me take this for you," she answered, her voice steady and professional despite her own tears. "This is Ruby Mae Thornton. I'm with Marcus Coleman right now." Yes, I understand." She closed her eyes, her free hand gripping Marcus's arm. "How long does he have? Minutes can you put her on speaker?" Ruby looked at Marcus with devastating gentleness. "Your mama wants to talk to you, sweetheart. She's still here. She's waiting for you." Marcus took the phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The flight attendant, Jennifer, quickly moved to put it on the plane's speaker system, her own face streaked with tears. "Go ahead, sir. We've patched it through. Everyone can hear." A weak, rattling voice filled the cabin. "Marcus, baby, is that you?" Marcus's voice cracked completely. "Mama, Mama, I'm here. I'm on the plane. I'm coming home to you." "I know, baby." Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper, each word an effort. "The nurse told me. But Marcus, listen to me. Listen to your mama." "I'm listening. Mama, I'm here, baby. I need you to know something. I need you to hear this before I go." She coughed, a wet, terrible sound. "You've been the best son a woman could ever ask for, from the day you were born. You've been my greatest joy." Marcus slid to the floor of the aisle, the phone still broadcasting his mother's voice to the entire cabin. Walt knelt beside him. Catherine stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. Passengers who moments ago had been strangers now wept openly for this man and his dying mother. "Mama, please," Marcus sobbed. "Please don't go yet. I'm almost there. Just hold on a little longer. Baby, I'm tired. I'm so tired. I'm tired. And I've been holding on, waiting to tell you one more time how proud I am of you. How your daddy would be so proud." Her breathing grew more labored. "That box you made me, the one with the hummingbird, I'm holding it right now. The nurse gave it to me from your bag that you left here." Marcus looked confused, then remembered. He'd made 2 boxes. One he'd kept to give her in person. One he'd left at the hospice last week in case he didn't make it back in time. Dorothy continued, her voice fading. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone ever gave me. Every time I look at it, I think about your hands making it, the same hands as your daddy. Carpenter's hands that can take raw wood and make something precious. That's who you are, Marcus. You take broken things and make them beautiful." "Mama," Marcus could barely speak through his tears. "I love you. I love you so much. I love you too, baby." I always have. From the moment I knew you were growing inside me. I loved you before you drew your first breath." She paused, struggling. "Now, you listen to me, Marcus James Coleman. You listen good." The cabin was silent except for her voice and the sound of Marcus's grief. "When you get off this plane, I won't be here anymore. Not the way I am now. But baby, I'll still be with you. Every time you pick up a piece of wood, every time you build something with those hands, every time you show kindness when someone tries to make you small, that's me. That's your daddy. That's all the love we poured into you coming back out into the world." Marcus pressed the phone to his chest as if he could hold her closer. "And Marcus, that man who gave you his seat this morning, that was your daddy's love coming back around. That's how love works. Baby, it circles back. The good your daddy did didn't die with him. It's been living all these years. And today it came home to his son." Walt was crying so hard his shoulders shook. Ruby had her arms around both men now. This stranger who'd become family in a crisis. "Don't cry for me," Dorothy whispered. "I've had a good life. I got to raise you. I got to watch you become a man your daddy would be proud to call son. I got to love and be loved. That's more than a lot of people get. Mama, please," Marcus begged, but he could hear it in her voice. She was leaving. "One more thing, baby. The most important thing." Her voice was so faint now that everyone in the cabin leaned forward to hear. "That woman who tried to take your seat, the one who's standing there crying right now, I can feel her in the room somehow. I know she's there." Catherine gasped, pressing both hands to her mouth. "Tell her I forgive her," Dorothy said. "Tell her that hurt people, but healed people heal people. Tell her it's not too late for her to heal. It's not too late for any of us." Catherine collapsed into seat 2B, the seat she'd fought so hard to keep, sobbing into her hands. "And tell her," Dorothy continued, her voice now just breath and will. "Tell her to go to her daughter. Tell her to say she's sorry. Tell her that love is the only thing we take with us. So give it freely. I'll tell her, Mama. I promise. Good boy. My good boy." A long pause, the sound of labored breathing. Then, so quietly that everyone had to strain to hear, "I'm ready now. Baby, I'm going to go see your daddy. He's been waiting so long to meet his son, and I'm going to tell him all about you." "Mama, no. Please. I love you, Marcus. I'll always love you. Be good. Be kind. Make beautiful things." Her voice was fading like smoke. "And baby, when you build your next table or chair or cabinet, know that your mama and daddy are both there with you, in those hands, in that heart." The breathing stopped. There was a long moment of terrible silence. Then a nurse's voice, gentle and sad. "She's gone, Marcus. I'm so sorry. She's gone." The phone fell from Marcus's hand. He made a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob, a raw animal sound of grief that tore through the cabin like a blade. Walt caught him as he fell forward, holding him as he'd been held 53 years ago in a jungle halfway around the world. Ruby picked up the phone, spoke quietly to the nurse, then ended the call. She knelt beside the two men on the floor of the airplane aisle, surrounded by strangers who'd become witnesses to the most intimate moment of Marcus's life. The captain's voice came over the intercom, thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to delay our departure. Mr. Coleman needs time. We all need time." No one protested. No one checked their watches. The entire cabin sat in silent solidarity with a carpenter who'd just lost his mother while trying to race home to her. Time seemed to stop inside that airplane cabin. Marcus remained on the floor, held by Walt and Ruby, his body racked with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than his lungs. The other passengers sat frozen in their seats, bearing witness to a grief so profound it felt sacred to watch. No one looked away. No one checked their phones. They simply sat with him in his pain. These strangers who 30 minutes ago had been concerned only with their own destinations. Catherine Preston stood slowly from seat 2B, her designer suit rumpled, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. She walked on unsteady legs to where Marcus knelt and lowered herself to the floor beside him. She didn't touch him. She simply sat there, her own tears falling silently. "Mr. Coleman," she said softly, waiting until his sobs quieted enough that he might hear her. "Your mother's last words were about forgiveness, about me. A woman who treated you terribly, who tried to take from you, who said things I can never unsay." Her voice broke. "She used her last breaths on this earth to offer me grace I don't deserve." Marcus lifted his head from Walt's shoulder, his face swollen and wet, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at Catherine as if seeing her for the first time. "She said to tell you it's not too late," Marcus whispered, his mother's words flowing through him even in his grief. "Not too late to heal. Not too late to go to your daughter and say you're sorry." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "My mama spent her last minutes on earth thinking about other people's pain. That's who she was." Catherine pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. "I don't deserve that kindness." "None of us deserve the kindness we get," Ruby said gently. "That's what makes it grace." She looked around the cabin at all the watching faces. "We're all broken people trying to get through this world without breaking each other more. Sometimes we fail, but we keep trying." The captain stepped fully out of the cockpit, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was a tall man with silver hair and deep-set eyes that had seen decades of humanity at 30,000 feet. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority tempered by compassion. "My name is Raymond Williams. I've been flying for 35 years. I want you to know that this crew, this airline, everyone on this plane, we're going to get you home to your mother, even if she's gone. You deserve to be there. You deserve to say your goodbyes properly." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "But first," Captain Williams continued, "I think we all need a moment. What just happened here, what we all witnessed, that's bigger than schedules and departure times." He looked around the cabin. "Anyone who has a problem with taking time to honor this man's loss can take it up with me personally." Not a single passenger spoke. Instead, one by one, they began to stand. the businessman from 1A, the young couple from row 4, an elderly woman from the back, a teenager traveling alone. They formed a line in the aisle, and one by one, they approached Marcus. The businessman went first, kneeling down to Marcus's level. "I lost my father 2 years ago," he said quietly. "I was in a meeting when he died. I chose work over being there. I've regretted it every day since." He placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You tried. You did everything you could. That matters." The young woman from row 4 was next. Her mascara streaked down her face. "My grandmother raised me. She died when I was in college, and I didn't make it home in time either. But you know what? She knew I loved her, just like your mother knew. The love doesn't end just because they're gone. One by one, they came. Each person sharing a loss, a regret, a moment when death had touched their lives and changed them. The cabin became a communion of grief, strangers united by the universal experience of losing someone they loved. An elderly black woman who'd been sitting in Economy Plus, who'd apparently heard everything, came forward, leaning on a cane. "Baby," she said to Marcus, her voice carrying the cadence of the Deep South. "Your mama raised you right. I can tell because in your worst moment, when that woman tried to take from you, you still had grace. That's Dorothy Coleman living in you. She's not gone as long as you keep being the man she raised you to be." Marcus looked up at her. This woman who reminded him so much of his mother, and fresh tears spilled down his face. "How do I do this?" he asked, his voice broken. "How do I live in a world without her?" The old woman knelt with difficulty, her joints protesting, until she was eye level with him. "The same way she lived in a world without your daddy, one day at a time, one breath at a time. And you remember that love doesn't die. It changes shape, but it doesn't die." Walt, who'd been silent through all of this, finally spoke. "Marcus, I need to give you something." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope, yellowed with age. "After your father saved my life, after I got stateside and healed up, I tried to find him. I wanted to thank him, to tell him what his sacrifice meant. By the time I got back to the States and recovered enough to search, I learned he'd been killed in action." He pressed the envelope into Marcus's hands. "I tracked down his unit. I talked to every man who'd served with him. I collected their stories, their memories. I wanted your family to know what kind of man he was. I sent a letter to the address I had for your mother in 1971, but it came back. No longer at this address. Without internet back then, I couldn't find her. I tried for years." Marcus opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were several handwritten letters, yellowed photographs, and a Bronze Star medal. "I've carried these for 53 years, Walt said, his voice thick, "hoping that someday, somehow, I'd find James Coleman's family. And this morning, when I heard you say your name at that gate, when I saw that satchel, I knew God or fate or whatever you want to call it had finally brought me to you." Marcus pulled out one of the letters and began to read aloud, his voice halting. "James Coleman was the bravest man I ever knew. He didn't have to volunteer for medic duty. He could have stayed back at base, but he said, "Somebody's got to make sure these boys get home to their mamas." He talked about his wife Dorothy every single day. Showed everyone a picture of her pregnant. He'd say, "That's my boy in there, Marcus. I'm building him a better world, one saved life at a time." And he never got to meet you, Marcus, but he loved you before you were born. He died trying to make the world safe for you. The cabin was silent except for the sound of people crying. Even the flight attendants stood with tears streaming down their faces. Marcus pulled out a photograph, and his breath caught. A young James Coleman in uniform, smiling at the camera with confident, kind eyes. Marcus held it up next to his own face, and the resemblance was startling. They had the same strong jaw, the same broad nose, the same eyes that carried both hope and sorrow. "You look exactly like him," Walt whispered. "Like I'm looking at a ghost." Ruby leaned close to Marcus. "Your mama kept your daddy alive through her stories. Now Walt's keeping them both alive through his. That's how we honor the dead, baby. We keep telling their stories. We keep living the values they taught us." Catherine, still sitting on the floor nearby, spoke up. "Mr. Coleman, your mother's last words were about forgiveness and healing. She wanted me to go to my daughter." She pulled out her phone with trembling hands. "Would it be all right if I called her? Right now I know this is your moment. But your mother, she made me realize I've been wasting time I don't have, time none of us have." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "My mama's last gift to the world was trying to heal somebody else's broken relationship." "Yeah. Call your daughter. Don't waste another minute." Catherine's hands shook so badly she could barely dial. Ruby reached over and steadied her hands, helping her find the number. The phone rang on speaker, once, twice, 3 times. A young woman's voice, cautious and surprised. "Mom." Catherine's face crumpled. "Sarah? Baby? I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I've hurt you, but I just watched a man lose his mother. And his mother's dying words were about forgiveness and not wasting time. And Sarah, I can't waste another day. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for controlling you, for suffocating you, for loving you so badly that I pushed you away." Silence on the other end of the line. Everyone in the cabin held their breath. "Mom," Sarah's voice cracked. "I've been wanting to call you for months. I just didn't know how. I didn't know if you'd changed. If you could change. I'm trying, baby. I'm sitting on an airplane floor right now, crying with a cabin full of strangers, because a dying woman taught me that it's never too late to choose love over fear." Catherine sobbed. "I don't want to control you anymore. I just want to know you. I want to be your mom, not your manager. Can you forgive me? Can we try again?" "Mom," Sarah said, and she was crying too now. "I'm getting married in 5 days, and I want you there, not as Catherine Preston, CEO. Just as my mom. Can you do that? Can you just be my mom?" Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "Yes. Yes, baby. I can do that. I want to do that more than anything." "Okay," Sarah whispered. "Okay, Mom. Come to my wedding. Let's start over." They talked for a few more minutes, making plans, crying, laughing through tears. When Catherine hung up, She looked at Marcus with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "Your mother just saved my relationship with my daughter from beyond the grave." Marcus wiped his face and managed the smallest smile. "That's what my mama did. She fixed broken things. She made beauty out of pain." He looked down at the wooden box still clutched in his hands. "She taught me that love is the only thing we take with us when we go. So we should give it freely while we're here." Captain Williams stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman, I know you've just suffered a devastating loss. If you need to deplane, if you need time, we understand. But if you want to go to Mobile, if you want to be with your mother even though she's passed, we'll get you there. It's your choice." Marcus looked around the cabin at all these faces, strangers who'd become something more in the span of an hour. He thought about his mother's words. "The good your daddy didn't die with him. It's been living all these years, and today it came home to his son." "I need to go home," Marcus said quietly. "I need to be with her, even if she's gone. I need to be there." Captain Williams nodded. "Then let's get you home, son. Let's get you home." The plane finally pushed back from the gate 47 minutes late. Not a single passenger complained as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Marcus sat in seat 2B, the window seat that had caused so much conflict an hour before. Now it felt sacred, a gift purchased with his mother's final blessing and a stranger's 53-year-old debt of gratitude. Walt sat beside him in 2A, and Ruby had moved from her original seat to sit across the aisle in 2C. Catherine sat behind them, her laptop closed, her phone clutched in her hand as if it were a lifeline to her daughter. The takeoff was smooth, the engine's roar filling the cabin as Seattle fell away beneath them. Marcus pressed his forehead against the window, watching the city disappear into clouds, and felt the weight of his mother's absence settle into his bones. It wasn't the sharp pain of the phone call anymore. It had transformed into something deeper, a vast emptiness that he knew would be his companion for years to come. "Tell me more about him," Marcus said quietly to Walt, not taking his eyes from the window. "Tell me everything you remember about my father." Walt settled back in his seat, his weathered hands folded in his lap, and began to speak. His voice carried clearly in the hushed cabin, and other passengers leaned subtly toward them, drawn into the story like children around a campfire. "Your father had a laugh that filled a room," Walt began, a soft smile crossing his face at the memory. "One of those deep, genuine laughs that made everyone around him want to laugh too. He'd find humor in the strangest places. Once, we were dug into a trench during a monsoon. Water up to our knees, leeches everywhere, and he started making jokes about opening a swimming pool business when we got home. Had the whole unit cracking up while we waited for the rain to stop." Marcus listened, hungry for every detail, every scrap of information about the man he'd never known. "He was gentle with his hands," Walt continued. "I remember watching him one afternoon during a lull. He'd found a piece of wood, probably part of a blown-up crate, and he was carving it with his knife. One of the guys asked what he was making, and he said it was a toy truck for his son. For you, he said when he got home, the first thing he'd do was put it in your hands and watch you play with it." A sob escaped Marcus's throat. "Did he finish it?" Walt's face fell. "I don't know. He was still working on it the last time I saw him alive." He paused, then reached into his jacket again. But I have something else." He pulled out a small, tattered notebook. "Your father kept a journal. Nothing fancy. Just a little notebook he'd write in when he had time. After he died, his lieutenant gave it to me because I was the last person he'd saved. The lieutenant thought I should have it, should know what kind of man had given his life for others." Walt held the notebook out to Marcus with trembling hands. "I've kept this for 53 years. I've read it 100 times. But it belongs to you now. It belongs to his son." Marcus took the notebook as if it were made of glass. The cover was stained and worn, the pages yellowed and fragile. He opened it carefully, and his father's handwriting appeared before him, slanted and confident. The first entry was dated January 1970. "Dorothy wrote me today. She's 6 months along. Doctor says it's a boy. I'm going to have a son. A son. I can't stop thinking about him. What will I teach him? How will I be a good father when I barely remember my own? But I know this. I'll love him. I'll make sure he knows he's loved every single day of his life. I'll build him a better world than this one. A world where men don't have to kill each other over politics and land." Marcus couldn't read any more. He closed the notebook and pressed it to his chest, tears streaming silently down his face. Ruby reached across the aisle and took his hand, saying nothing, just holding on. The flight attendant, Jennifer, approached quietly. "Mr. Coleman, I've arranged for you to have privacy in the back galley if you need time alone. Or if you'd like, we can bring you anything you need." Marcus shook his head. "Thank you, but I'd rather be here, with them." He gestured to Walt and Ruby, to Catherine behind him, to the businessman across the aisle who'd shared his own story of loss. "I'd rather be with family." The word hung in the air. Family. These strangers who an hour ago had been nothing to each other had become bound by shared grief, shared grace, shared humanity. Captain Williams's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 35,000 feet. Weather looks good all the way to Dallas. We should arrive on schedule." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I've been flying for 35 years, and I've never been more proud of a group of passengers. What happened at the gate today, what you all witnessed and participated in, that's the best of humanity. Mr. Coleman, we're getting you home. We're getting you to your mother. The whole crew is honored to be part of this journey." Spontaneous applause broke out in the cabin. Marcus couldn't speak, could only nod his acknowledgement. The hours passed in a strange compression of time. Marcus alternated between reading his father's journal entries, talking with Walt about Vietnam, and sitting in silence watching the clouds. Ruby told him stories about her 42 years as a hospice nurse, about the hundreds of people she'd sat with as they died, about what she'd learned about life from watching it end. "The ones who die peacefully," Ruby said, "they're the ones who loved well, not perfectly, but well. They're the ones who said their sorries and their thank yous. They're the ones who didn't wait for the perfect moment to tell people they mattered." She looked at Marcus intently. "Your mama died peacefully, didn't she? Even over that phone. I could hear it in her voice. She was ready because she'd done what she came here to do. She loved you completely. She raised a good man. She fixed what was broken around her right up until her last breath." Marcus nodded. She spent her last words trying to heal a stranger's relationship with her daughter. "That's a life well lived," Ruby said simply. "That's someone who understood what matters." Catherine leaned forward from her seat behind them. "I'll never forget what your mother did for me, a woman I never met, who was dying, who should have been thinking only of herself, used her last moments to offer me grace and wisdom." Her voice shook. "I'm going to my daughter's wedding because of your mother. I'm getting my daughter back because Dorothy Coleman cared more about healing than about being right or getting revenge or any of the things I would have cared about." The plane began its descent into Dallas. Marcus would have a 3-hour layover before his connection to Mobile. 3 hours to sit in an airport knowing his mother was dead, knowing he'd never see her alive again. As they landed and taxied to the gate, Walt turned to Marcus. "When we get off this plane, I'm not saying goodbye. I'm coming to Mobile with you. I'm going to your mother's funeral. I owe it to your father. I owe it to you." Marcus started to protest, but Walt held up his hand. "I've waited 53 years to honor James Coleman properly. I'm not missing this chance. Besides," his voice softened, "you shouldn't go through this alone." "I'll come too," Ruby said, "if you'll have me. I don't have anywhere more important to be than with someone who needs family." Catherine spoke up from behind them. "My daughter's wedding isn't until next week. I'd like to come as well, if that's all right. I want to pay my respects to the woman who changed my life in her last moments." Marcus looked at these 3 people, strangers when he'd boarded this plane, now offering to cross the country to stand beside him at his mother's funeral. The kindness was overwhelming, almost too much to bear on top of his grief. "You don't have to do that," he managed to say. "You've all already done so much." "We're not doing it because we have to," Walt said firmly. "We're doing it because we want to. Because your father taught me that we don't leave each other behind, and we're not leaving you behind now." The plane came to a stop at the gate. Passengers began gathering their belongings, but there was none of the usual rush and bustle. People moved slowly, respectfully, many of them stopping to say a quiet word to Marcus as they passed. "I'll be praying for you, son." "Praying for—" "Your mother sounded like an amazing woman. Thank you for reminding us what matters." One by one, they filed past, these witnesses to the most intimate moment of Marcus's life, and each face held the same expression, recognition of shared humanity, shared fragility, shared grace. When the plane finally emptied, Marcus, Walt, Ruby, and Catherine were the last to leave. Marcus gathered his father's satchel, now containing not just his own belongings, but his father's journal, the letters from his unit, the photographs, the Bronze Star medal. The bag felt heavier now, weighted with history and love and sacrifice. As they walked up the jetway into the Dallas terminal, Marcus stopped for a moment and looked back at the plane. That aircraft, that ordinary Tuesday morning flight, had been transformed into something sacred. It had been a chapel, a confessional, a place where strangers became family, and where his mother's love had reached across the boundary of death to heal broken relationships. "Ready?" Walt asked gently, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus took a deep breath. "No, but I don't think you ever are. You just keep walking forward." They walked through the terminal together, 4 people bound by a morning that had changed them all. Behind them, Flight 447 would continue its service, flying other passengers to other destinations. But it would never be just an airplane again. It would always be the place where Dorothy Coleman's final act of love had rippled outward, where James Coleman's sacrifice had come full circle, where strangers had remembered how to see each other's humanity. Marcus checked his phone and saw messages from his sisters, frantic and grieving. He called them, told them he was on his way home, told them he wasn't alone. He told them about Walt, about Ruby, about Catherine, about the plane full of witnesses to their mother's final gift to the world, as they sat in the Dallas terminal waiting for the connection to Mobile. Marcus opened his father's journal again and read more entries. Stories about Dorothy, about dreams for the future, about hopes for a son he'd never meet. And on the last page, dated 2 days before James Coleman died, one final entry: "If I don't make it home, if something happens to me out here, I want my son to know this. I died trying to build him a better world. Every man I save is one less widow, one less orphan, one less family broken by this war. I may never hold my boy, but every life I save is my way of holding him, of loving him from far away. Tell him his daddy was thinking of him right up until the end. Tell him to be good, be kind, and make beautiful things. That's all any of us can do in this hard world. Make something beautiful." Marcus closed the journal and looked at the 3 people sitting with him, waiting to board another plane to accompany him to his mother's funeral. 3 strangers who'd become family in a crisis. 3 lives his parents had touched even after death. He thought about his mother's final words: "Love is the only thing we take with us, so give it freely." He thought about his father's last journal entry: "Make something beautiful." And Marcus understood, finally, what his life's work would be, not just building furniture with his hands, but building connections between people, building grace where there had been judgment, building love where there had been fear. His parents hadn't left him money or property or any material inheritance. They'd left him something infinitely more valuable: the example of lives lived in service to others, the model of love given freely even at great cost. As they called his flight to Mobile, Marcus stood with his new family and walked toward the gate, toward home, toward saying goodbye to his mother's body while holding fast to everything she'd taught him about how to live. The journey wasn't over. In some ways, it was just beginning.